Okay, we have a quorum, so we'll go ahead and begin. Dr. Dimitro has waited quite a few hours for his opportunity. So if we could go ahead and get started. Dr. Dimitro has a couple of agenda items for us to discuss regarding the superintendent search. So take it away whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, and thanks for taking the time to work on the next steps of the superintendent search. I have 4 goals for you between now and the time we're going to end. First one is to share the information from the leadership profile report when we were in the district, and you have that in written format. I'm not going to take a whole lot of time presenting it because you've had the chance to read it and review it, but I do want to hit a couple of highlights in that report. Second one, and the important task for today, is to finalize the desired characteristics that you're seeking in your next superintendent. We want to get this information finalized because you're going to use it when you interview candidates, but candidates also need to know what those desired characteristics are as they finalize their applications and materials to submit to you, so they're addressing issues of importance to you. And then the third thing that we wanted to touch base on is to talk about the committee structure and the groups that are going to be invited to participate on the community committee. And my last goal is to get you back on track for 6 o'clock. So let's start with the report. We were here over a period of 2 weeks, had the chance to meet with lots of people. We talked with 192 people in individual meetings that were invited to sessions, and those were mostly community and district leadership kinds of roles. And then we held open community forums for anyone to attend in the evening. We held two community forums in each one of the districts, one during the day and one in the evening. People were welcome to come to any of them. They were well advertised and the information was out there. And then we also did the online survey, which was posted for most of the month of January. In your report, in the leadership profile report, you have the information that we heard from stakeholders in terms of there are dozens of pages of comments in that report, which you can review. But you also have the summary, which I'm going to talk briefly about today. And then you also have the online survey results as a separate document, which I've tried to pull out the highlights from what I learned from that survey and incorporate it into the leadership profile report in terms of where the connections were or disconnections that we heard between the online information and when we met with people. So when you look at the strengths of the district, in general, your community is very pleased with your school district. And that's not to say that there aren't people who shared very deep and genuine concerns about issues and things that they thought needed to happen differently or problems that they saw. But the general sense is a strong, positive, proactive, professional organization that has children at the heart of the work that it does. And part of that came across, particularly from parents, community members, and staff, was the breadth and depth of your programming. Because you are good at what you do, and because you have provided lots of services, I think the majority of your community has the expectation that all of those things are required for you to provide. And that might be an opportunity for you in the future to say a lot of the things that you do in terms of all the services and programming that you are offering is not a requirement by the state. It's things that Fairfax is choosing to do in terms of how you provide those services. One of the things of particular note, and I know this came up a little bit earlier in the budget discussion, but there is an appreciation for how Fairfax deals with both ends of the spectrum. Special education is often recognized as something that attracts families to live in the community and the quality of those services. And so is your programming for academically talented children. And that's an attraction for people to live here as well. Strong recognition across groups in terms of the quality of your staff that you employ. In fact, one of the things that was really encouraging to hear as an educator was the number of community members who commented on the fact that you do have strong employees in the school district, and it's important that you continue to treat them well as you've been doing that and support them as you move forward. Great appreciation for the salary increases that you were able to give and wanting to see that kind of support continue. And one of the things that I asked, because this was one of the key questions with a strong recognition of the kind of changes that you've made over the last few years of, taking on certain kinds of issues with social, emotional wellness of students, school starting times, health, food service kinds of issues. Is the district moving in the right direction? And overwhelmingly in the focus groups, I heard that as, yes, the strategic plan has set forth a very positive direction. The portrait of a graduate helps to define where we want to be going. In fact, in the focus groups, that was as strong as to say, we do not need someone to come in and alter that direction. In fact, it would do harm to the system to start all over again. There's been a lot of work that has been invested to move us along in this journey, and now is to see that plan implemented, deployed throughout the system, and really complete that work as you move forward. But I think what was interesting in that is if you look at the online survey, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time about this, but you can go back to your results. And on page 7, when we asked the question on the survey, the district is headed in the right direction. Overall, the majority of respondents said that that was true. But if you look at how it fell out, administrators said 75% of administrators said that, 61% of staff said that, 54 of certified staff, 54% of support staff said that. But if you look at community, parents, and students, it was 30, 39, and 37. So there's a bit of a disconnect there between how internally people are looking at your direction and externally looking at your direction. I want to caution you on what you think about that. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're moving in the wrong direction, and it's a relatively small sample, and I know you have lots of other methods that you collect this information. Because I can't answer the question for you, are community members feeling you're not moving in the right direction because you're not progressive enough, you're not traditional enough, you're not fast enough, you're not taking enough time in terms of changes? It doesn't lay out the details of what they're saying as to why they're feeling that way. But I think this is one of the places for the new superintendent to really look at this issue to see how is the staff feeling one way and at least a portion of the community is feeling a different way, and where are the connections and the disconnections between that piece of information. And that's one of the places that there were a couple of those items when we asked on the state of the district questions on that survey, that there was a difference between how internal staff members saw it and how external community parents saw that. So it's a matter for future investigation. When you look at challenges and issues, a couple of things came across strongly. The first one being the changing, and I said financial demographics. Sometimes people said demographics in the county, but often when we probed deeper into that conversation, it was the changing economics in the county and this widespread belief on the part of many of the people that interacted with us is that there's growing disparity in the county. And that's having an impact on how people are feeling about living in the county in terms of regions of the county that have much more significant needs than other regions of the county. Also growing immigrant and ESOL, ELL populations of students with second language needs, immigrant families with needs, and a recognition on the part of many of your stakeholders that growing student population takes, to some degree, different services, but also additional services, and are often more expensive to educate than your typical average student, because there are additional services that might be needed to help them learn English. At the same time, you're trying to maintain their educational programming and learning in the other subject areas. Also, continued emphasis on student well-being. You're aware of all those issues. You've dealt with them many times on various kinds of things, but there's a strong desire on your part of the community to keep student well-being at the forefront of many of your conversations. Sometimes in terms of choices that you make, sometimes in terms of choices that are outside of your control. But student stress often came up as an issue in terms of how students were feeling in the system. Infrastructure needs, which I know you've spent a lot of time on in terms of what is necessary in terms of your facilities and your technology needs in the future. Staffing needs came up as an issue in terms of, certainly I mentioned the compensation kinds of issues, but for one of the first times in my experience over the last 10 years, there's been a pretty significant recognition that it's not just hard to staff positions anymore that we're starting to experience a teacher shortage in, but it's sometimes classroom positions and other positions which have traditionally been easier to fill. And so when you look at your size, your turnover, and your needs in terms of staffing, you're going to feel some of those things before many other school districts in this country are going to feel those kinds of issues to make sure that you maintain quality staff. Staff morale kinds of issues came up, and many of you have shared this in the past, and I know you've talked about it, but they often revolve around workload kinds of issues in terms of, we know that teaching has changed significantly, not just because of Fairfax expectations, but because of national expectations, higher levels of accountability, greater demands in terms of data and paperwork and testing. And those kinds of things are important issues in terms of how your staff members are feeling. They often shared the perspective that it wasn't any one expectation that they thought was wrong in terms of, it wasn't, just too much testing or data management. If you took those things in isolation, they thought each one of them were probably a good thing to be doing. But when you put all of those increased demands together, a balance question starts to emerge as to what the appropriate balance is for the staff across the board. And then you've just spent the last 4 or 5 hours talking about the other challenge that exists. So you know that well in terms of the recognition of the budget needs in the system. And we'll talk in a minute about how that translates into one of the desired skills sets on the part of the superintendent. The last section of the report is the areas of skill sets and abilities for your new superintendent. Relationship and team builder, stakeholder engagement is something that people are feeling good about in the system, that over the last 3 or 4 years, they feel that Fairfax has become more responsive to internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. They want to see that work continue in terms of listening, which is one of the other major characteristics they talked about, of somebody who really hears the concerns of both individual kinds of issues and organizational kinds of issues, and then builds the leadership team and creates the culture to address that. Advocacy for all relates to that same kind of skill set of making sure that the superintendent is responsive to all of those kinds of concerns and has systems in place to be able to be responsive when possible, but also to have the strength to be able to say no when something isn't possible and to explain the reasons for that, which relates to the communicator part of it. Again, a sense that communication is improving and continues to be important within the system, and that the new superintendent can be the spokesperson for children within the community with all the various stakeholders that are out there. The next 3 tie together in a kind of unique way, because I think you're at a very unique place in your history. The strategic leader piece of it was where people talked about the direction of the district. They want to see that continue. They don't want to see that plan as stagnant, to say it's lockstep and this is the only thing that we're going to address. They want to see somebody who is visionary enough to keep their eye on the horizon and know what the issues are that are going to be coming down the line. But to be able to take that and to deploy that throughout the system and really see that strategic plan really become operationalized in all of your schools. So it's kind of a unique balance, and particularly when you're looking for a superintendent, there was not a really strong desire to have someone come in and to be the savior, the visionary to set a new direction for the system, to really reboot the system in any kind of way. But at the same time, to be forward-thinking and to be knowledgeable about that. And one of the interesting things that came across in that regard was how important knowledge of Fairfax, Northern Virginia, and Virginia might be in that equation moving forward. There was a fair amount of comments to say understanding and appreciating this environment is really important to see that plan fully deployed. Knowledgeable about boardsmanship was the reference that I was making about the budget piece. A lot of your stakeholders talked about the fact that the superintendent has to be sophisticated enough to work with two boards. With you as the school board moving forward, and I think as Pat said earlier, you're responsible for the expenditure side of the program and defining those kinds of issues and the programs and services that are going to be offered, but to also have the skill set to work with the county board on the revenue side of that equation and to build those relationships. The dilemma for this, and we talked about this in numerous community forums, you know this well, is that everyone talked about the fact that they want a collaborative relationship that's going to work well here. The struggle with that is, if you look at your history, collaboration hasn't necessarily meant increased funding. And sometimes confrontation or at least strong advocacy has been what is necessary to support those funding levels. So while the thing that people want to see happen in terms of everyone singing kumbaya between the two boards and saying this is where we're going as a county and the superintendent can help us do this, the reality of what people saw was there's a balance there between building relationships and really being that advocate to help people understand what's necessary to move forward. And then the last piece of it relates back to the strategic leadership kind of question of, if you notice when we get to some of the online surveys, there's a couple of items that came across as managerial skills. To really be an effective manager of this organization and this business with a strong instructional focus, but also a deep, deep understanding of the financial management aspects of how do you continue to set priorities and spend your resources on your priorities. The 5 attributes that came across on the online survey are summarized on the last page of the report. To effectively manage, or to plan and manage the long-range financial health of the school district and serve as the primary advocate. To recruit, employ, and evaluate and retain effective personnel throughout the system. And then the instructional leadership aspect of increased academic, artistic, social, and emotional learning on the part of the whole child. And then those were actually the first, 4th, and 5th attributes, so 2 management and 1 instructional leadership characteristic. And then the 2nd and the 3rd characteristics related to stakeholder engagement in terms of that interaction, to foster a positive professional climate of mutual trust and respect, and to listen effectively to stakeholders. So, quick overview summary of what we heard from the community. We took that information and translated it into the 1-page description that you have of the desired characteristics. And based on what we learned and what you know about your system, the document that we're going to put up in a minute in terms of the desired characteristics is the document that we want to define today. But I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have about the report before we move into a conversation about whether the desired characteristics capture what you need.
Hey,
Tom?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I had Mr. Moon first. Go ahead.
Okay, so we're going to talk about desired characteristics a little bit later on, correct?
Yes.
But I guess I could wait until then for these follow-up questions, but let me ask one question.
Okay.
Based upon what you have presented to us thus far. You met with 144 community members and also 1,700 some, email survey respondents compared to 4 years ago, or 4.5 years ago. What do you consider to be the level of interest from the community in participating, in providing feedback?
The people who certainly participated were very engaged and were invited to participate and join in that. Last time we met with 400 stakeholders, so it was about half this time, and it was the same sort of groups that we invited. So I don't know that we had the same numbers of people participating. I think particularly about the parent advocacy groups last time. I think I had 2 or 3 meetings in which probably 30 different advocacy groups showed up and talked about those kinds of things. We held 2 meetings this time, and there were probably about a dozen of those people who participated. In some ways, that might be a good sign that they feel that their issues have been addressed or at least being listened to. In some of the other organizations, some of the community groups, I don't know that we had the same number, but we did have all of the leadership groups of the PTA, your union or not your union, your association representatives participate in that, the board members. So I think we got a pretty good sample. In terms of the online survey, actually this response is stronger than the first round of responses that we did last time. It was about 1,300 respondents last time, but then if you remember, we took it all back out and we did a second round of interviews, and we got to 3,800, I think, combining both of those 2 rounds. So about half the participation that we had last time.
Okay. And after you present the desired characteristics later, the question I'll be follow up with you is how different this is from 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay.
And what is different?
Mr. Wilson?
Thank you. So just a couple of things jumped out to me in the state of the district item analysis section. What was surprising to me was some of the disparities between categories of respondents, so, in particular on, and I think you mentioned the heading in the right direction was one where there was a disparity. Another one was there is transparent communications from the district. There was significantly lower amounts of statements affirming that, and also in the district is financially responsible. Also, great disparities, and I would be interested to know sort of a similar thing. How does that compare to your most recent analysis of the district, from 3 years ago? And is there any more detail you can provide about those two?
We changed our survey between the last time we did this and this time. So this section was not in our survey last time. It's a new section to the survey. So last time the online survey only focused on the desired characteristics. So I don't have previous data on how community members felt and how staff members felt last time. This was, the reason I mentioned this in terms of the district of the right direction, I think in the report I mentioned the other two, is the online survey results are different than what I heard from community members and staff members when I interviewed them. So I didn't hear a lot about transparent communication not being a positive on the community. In fact, the community members who attended the community forum often acknowledged that they thought communication had improved. So where this is exactly coming from, I don't know. That's why I think it's a matter of future investigation. And fiscally responsible, that's a range of issues that we heard some people saying the district needs to be more fiscally responsible.
So is that typical, though? Like, I mean, is that a normal sort of gap between, in this case, the fiscally responsible, 2/3 of the administrators that responded answered in the affirmative, but less than half of the teachers, and then approximately 1/3 of the citizens and the parents? Is that a kind of typical, because there's you're sitting in a different position for other.
We have different amounts of information and experience with that, so it's not atypical that you might see that disconnect. But what it would tell me as a superintendent is I'd certainly want to know why people don't feel that the board is being fiscally responsible, because I don't have the sense that the board feels that they're not being fiscally responsible in their decisions. So how is that communication being shared, and how do people know what that is? Or are there places that you can be more fiscally responsible and you need to address those kinds of issues?
And I guess I just wonder whether the transparency of communications ties into that.
Could be.
In the sense that the community may be.
I think those three are interrelated. Those three questions on that survey are interrelated.
Mrs. Strauss?
First of all, I want to thank you for providing all the information, all of it, because I think that was very useful. It's very helpful. And I think the characteristics, I think, are accurate. And I think the most important thing that we needed to know is the portrait of the graduate and the strategic plan. Is that the direction? And my sense in reading all of this, as well as the detailed stuff, that is the direction that we need to continue, because that's the big piece. We're not looking for a change agent to turn that upside down, or to get rid of the breadth and depth of the program. In other words, keep the whole piece together as best you can, and then walk on water to go forward. Again, in reading all of the detail, I thought there was a very strong indication that people are concerned about budgets and finances. People are tired of cutting and advocating and yada, 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 which we all know, and we're all tired of the same thing as well. So again, sort of my first piece, I think these characteristics are accurate. I have my own ideas as to why the online survey was different than the folks who actually came out, but I'll keep that to myself. But you're right. I mean, whoever we hire to come in, they need to be able to understand, figure out where all of that is going. So I really enjoyed seeing every piece of the detail. That really added to my understanding of what all was going on. So thank you.
Ms. McLaughlin?
So I do look forward to looking very carefully at all of the survey responses to sort of see where there's some patterns of consensus and agreement versus where there aren't. But I did just want to share with my colleagues that under vision and values section for the respondents, it's a little concerning to me when you see how the parents and the students responded under one of the sections said the district is heading in the right direction, and community members, parents, and students were all in the 30s. And I think that's something that we need to really understand why, because I think many of us, and you look at the administrator response, and 75% feel we're headed in the right direction. But, it overall, I think, to me, that's an area that, Hank, if you have any suggestions on how we as board members look at things like that and try to get a sense of what weight we give to it, how do we examine that, or just how that help informs what we're doing as part of the search. Because as you walked us through the characteristics, to me, I felt like it captured what my experience is both as a parent and as a board member. But again, realizing that a jurisdiction of our size, there is a diversity of experiences, but those numbers are pretty significant and pretty different. So that's where I think there is going to be a value for us to look at this as almost like peeling back the onion and seeing, okay, yes, the composite numbers, you might look at it, each one of us could look at it and say, okay, but then when you peel it back and look at certain stakeholder groups, I think we're going to need that better layer of understanding.
Right. Well, and the piece of it is, I think that's one of the tasks for the new superintendent, to really delve into that question to understand why that disconnect is there. I'll share with you the perspective of no one came to a meeting and said we need less of, and so please reduce this so that you can increase this. There were people who said we need more special education staff, we need more gifted staff. There was a general kind of comment about we do spend a lot of time and attention looking at the full spectrum of students and ends of the spectrum of the students, and there were people who said we need to spend more attention on the general education population of students and making sure that they're having all of their needs met. So I think when you look at the question, there is the possibility, are we headed in the right direction? It may be I'm thinking we're not headed in the right direction because I think we need more of X. And more of X was across the board of people wanted more of X, Y, Z, A, B, C, depending on who you talk to. So I think the critical question to me is not the percentages on those items, but the fact that there's a disconnect between how administrators and staff perceive those issues and how the broader community perceives those issues. And to really try to figure out why. I would speculate, knowing you well enough, that your administrators and staff have far more information about the direction you're heading in than the general public and possibly parents. So there might be a communication issue there that has to be dealt with. But maybe it's not. Maybe it is a directional issue that needs to be dealt with. And so to figure out some sort of mechanism moving forward, and when a new superintendent comes into the organization, it's a great opportunity to listen to those voices again. If you reflect back on what happened last time, there was a lot of listening and learning that happened in Karen's first few months, and she gathered a lot of information. Those might be issues that the new superintendent really wants to focus on as he or she does that listening and learning about the organization. Why do you feel this way? What is the communication that you'd like? What is the transparency that you'd like to see? So I don't know that any one item is significant in and of itself, but I do think the fact that all stakeholders don't see it the same way is something that I'd want to learn about as the new superintendent, about why that is and what's driving those issues. And this survey is not going to answer that. We didn't go into enough detail to find that out.
I think that, again, that all of this stakeholder work was to then develop the desired characteristics.
And I think that's why I came back to the issue of when we talked about the characteristics of communication and listening and thinking about that in terms of meaningful communication and engagement. And on this list, I listed this in alphabetical order. I did not list this in priority order.
That was smart.
So in terms of how we sort through it, I don't know that it has to be listed in priority order, but those might become more significant issues, particularly as you develop your questions and as you assess potential candidates as to where you place the priorities are on skill sets.
My recollection from doing this 4 years ago was we got a little hung up on which one would be going first, so I think the alphabetical order approach. So Pat, are you guys wanting input from us on this desired characteristics, or do you?
I think the way we're trying to do this is Hank is now taking questions or reflections on the report. Okay. Then we'll get into the draft of the characteristics.
All right, then I don't have any other questions. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. So I've got Ms. Evans, followed by Ms. Corbett-Sanders, Ms. Derenak-Kofax, and then Ms. Huff.
So I want to start by saying I really appreciate the lengthy leadership profile report. I think it's really excellent and has hit upon some important things, that, not just for this, but for us looking forward when we do have our new superintendent. I was glad to see the pinpointing of some of the greatest challenges moving forward, such as the economic disparity. That's something growing in our community, and we need to recognize that, as well as the need to continue focusing on student well-being. So I'm very glad to see that codified here in your report. I thought it was interesting when you asked for the top 5 that, I too looked at the differences between students and others, that the students put as among their top 5 someone who understands educational research and teaching and learning processes. That was one thing, but also addressing diversity and equity. So I believe the students were the only ones who specifically pinpointed that in their top 5. So I just think that that's something that we need to be aware of. I realize that the student sample size was relatively small, but that's probably instructive. So I just wanted to make those points, and thank you for the report.
Ms. Corbett-Sanders?
Thank you. I actually look at this a little bit differently. I think this is very important for the discussion that we're having now about the characteristics and profile of the next leader of the school system. But I also think that it's very instructive as we go through the process regarding budgets, because of the emphasis in the profile on the need for greater transparency, fiscal responsibility, setting a priority of long-term financial health for the system, importance of communications, and the importance of fostering mutual trust. And so what I think this says is that our constituents across the board are looking for more transparency in how we spend money, and assurances that we are doing this in a fiscally responsible manner. And I think that is something that addresses a sentiment in the community. The community's tired of constantly having to do budget battles. And so I think they're looking for the board, the school board, but also the leadership of the school system to give them assurances that the quality of education is going to be the first priority, but that we will deliver it in a financially responsible manner. And so I would just hope that as we go forward that we keep the information that was provided in this report in mind, not only for selecting the new superintendent, but in our other decisions too.
Ms. Derenak-Kovacs?
My questions were more for the second section, but I just want to say thank you, Hank, for this detailed report. I think it captures a lot of what we said. There were a couple things I feel that made me a little concerned. And maybe it goes with kind of the community is weary, and there was a much shorter turnaround in superintendents than we would have liked, because those numbers are striking, but they're half of what they were. That concerns me a little bit,
The participation
numbers, yes. And so that concerns me a bit. I still think we got from those smaller groups what we needed, and I think it's quite comprehensive. I do believe, and I guess that's all I have. The other ones my other comments are concerning when we actually get into the characteristics.
Okay, Ms. Huff?
I don't have the benefit of having done this 4 years ago, but I did notice that profile developed was alphabetical. And when I looked at it at first, I was like, oh, how do you order these? And it was clear it was alphabetical. However, I think our respondents have clearly laid out a specific order to those characteristics. I think they're all pretty much covered under those top 5. I do think we should consider looking at that, because I think if someone picks up, what is this school looking for, and they don't get to, maybe to Ms. Corbett-Sanders' point have a great financial strength, but they see that lower down and we're saying, hey, that's something we want higher up. I think it's worth talking about, and it seems like the community has almost already done it for us. I'm not set on it, but I do have concern that alphabetically it looks, when you order something in bullets so clearly, it does look like an order. I read the first thing first, and it seems like what I care about most. So,
Okay. Second step?
So the second step is exactly starting to talk about this document in terms of, is this, first of all, the right descriptors in terms of characteristics that you're looking for, and then if you have the question about should it be prioritized, and maybe we should take those separately rather than determining the order first, to talk about, are these descriptors the most important characteristics that you think you're seeking in the next superintendent? And this is really your list. It's created by the input that we heard from the community, but you are the body that's selecting the next superintendent. So what I want to put out to potential candidates is really the characteristics that you value as the board, because it's ultimately your job to define that and to let candidates know that. But if you remember when we had the conversation, for those people who participated last time, you crafted your questions around these topics as you created the script of what you were going to talk to candidates about. And then as you debriefed candidates, these were often the topics that you referred back to about the candidate's ability to address these kinds of issues. So this isn't just a generic list of what's nice to have. This is the list of what you feel is important as the Fairfax County School Board of what you're seeking in your next superintendent.
And I guess I would ask board members if we could resist the urge to edit and wordsmith here. We're more looking at these as long as we understand what they mean, then I think Hank is looking for our reaction. Are these the most important things that we want to see as well? I have Il Young and then Janie.
Since you have just advised board members not to wordsmith, I'm not going to wordsmith. I'm not good wordsmither anyway. I think I understand for second bullet, advocate for all staff. I think I can understand what's underneath. But even though this may go out to a potential candidate to see whether the potential candidate fits into these characteristics we are seeking, from for our consideration, this will also go out to community as a statement about what you are looking for. Statement from our next superintendent. And that heading, advocate for all staff, when you have another heading, advocate for all children, which I absolutely agree with, that might give a wrong, might taken wrong by at least certain part of a community, that even though we may seek a superintendent who will support the employees, who will be working to educate our children. When you say advocating for all staff, whether that should be raised to the level of sort of like equal level of advocating for all children, because we are using same advocate right there. Mm-hmm. So that's where my discomfort is. Again, I do not disagree with what's underneath, just a heading.
Okay. One of the reasons that I included it, and you asked how these were similar or different, we had Advocate for All Children in 2012 as one of the bullets. And I heard significant comments from community and from staff members about the superintendent listening to the concerns of staff and addressing those kinds of issues. So, but maybe it would be, and I understand your concern of, does it give the appearance that you're advocating for one group or over another in terms of your stakeholders that you serve? So maybe a better way to address it is to expand it to be an advocate for all stakeholders and include other stakeholder groups within that, both internal and external stakeholders.
I mean, I still like advocate for all children, standalone. as a desired characteristics. I just not comfortable with that heading for the second one.
Okay.
Okay. Ms. Strauss, followed by Mrs. Schultz.
Okay, first of all, however we put this together, I like the alphabetical order, and we're not arguing. I will agree with Mr. Moon on the heading for the second one, and it is the words that you have underneath it, the commitment to guide and support all staff. The guide and support, I think that explains better because our staff does need guidance and support and TLC, because they do feel beat up. And I think we all kind of acknowledge that. So a different header, because you also don't want to give the impression that we're an adult employment agency. And, from the community, it is always, how do we make sure that we have the very best people in the right spots, and then we really give them the tools and the support that they need to be the professionals that we know they are. So that's the sense. So maybe you wordsmith it.
Okay.
You're a good wordsmither. I do like the alphabetical order. I think it's very hard. And as the first one, advocate for all children. That becomes then, I think, a very sensible way to go. Thanks.
Okay, Mrs. Schultz.
So I'm going to chime in there, but I'm going to divert just slightly. I see that financial leadership or financial, executive skills are one thing. It's as if that's been lumped with the managerial leadership, and really advocate for all staff. What you're talking about is being an effective leader and manager. And so it seems to me like the advocate for all staff and managerial side of the fourth bullet really belong together. And the financial literacy, financial competency, financial strategic, whatever it is a standalone, because that's a big one. That's just, and I'm not going to wordsmith it at all, but I'm going to say that I think 2 and the second half of 4 belong together, and I think potentially resolves a lot. Boardsmanship expertise. That's marbly mouthed to me, and I don't really, board relationship expert, or board relationship, whatever. Saying what it is and being, colloquial to the type of language. I mean, that's an internal document type of phraseology to me, and doesn't necessarily, boardsmanship. That's gamesmanship to me. That's all the important stuff.
Okay, Ms. Derenak Kofax, followed by Ms. Corbett Sanders.
I agree with Ms. Strauss. I do not think we should even attempt to do anything other than alphabetical order on this, because it's just, they're all 1As, right? A couple things that when you talk about an advocate for all children, maybe one word that's missing from some of this is equity for all learners, or equity for all children. I think I like the word somewhere in there, equity, and I think this isn't probably the place to put it, but I think the strength to make decisions and commit research. It may be, you may want to put something in there, experience in districts that are having changes and growing socioeconomic disparity and changing demographics. Somehow refer to that in that advocate for all children and equity piece. And I think so we are. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. And then I kind of agree with Elizabeth that part of 4 can be in 2, that second half. I think that makes kind of sense to me. And then the one thing that is missing, and I think it's not captured, and I think it's really unique to Fairfax County with its proximity to DC and what actually happens. There's probably no other school board in the country that gets direct input from federal, federal, the federal government officials and electeds. We get direct input from the House of Delegates and senators. And so I think somewhere in there, the word, political experience, expertise, in that, again, experience in that area, because that is very unique to here, and it can be very, very overwhelming to someone who doesn't have that in their box, their skill set box, because Washington is unique. And we're all used to it living here, but a superintendent that would have, of course, unless they live here or have been here, but it can happen on a state level in a different way. So I think that kind of political experience.
Ms. Corbett-Sanders, followed by Ms. Palchik.
I echo what my colleagues have already suggested in making some changes, but I would also suggest that we have a portrait of a graduate, and I look at this as our portrait of a superintendent. And along those lines, this is kind of chunky and hard to understand whether this really is a portrait versus a skill list. And so I would advocate for making it much more action-oriented from the standpoint of an advocate for all students, not just children, board leader or board manager or something like that. And then I think I echo both Ms. Schultz and Mrs. Derenak-Kofax's comments about the standalone of being financial, a financial manager or a financial leader, and then put the management expertise and the advocate for all staff and put them underneath perhaps the organizational excellence so that it comes together. And then meaningful communication engagement, I would say an effective communicator, or something along those lines, because you've got some where it's action-packed and some it's just a descriptor, and we need to be consistent across all of it. And I also believe that we need to emphasize equity.
Okay, Ms. Palchik, followed by Mr. Wilson.
Thank you. Yes, I'm still thinking, but along the lines of splitting up financial and managerial, a couple of things. I'm trying to figure out if it's redundant or if we can kind of work some of that with the strategic leadership at the bottom. Some of that is the strategic management skills and strategic leadership. I originally was thinking more something I've been hearing quite a bit of is the ability to develop and help grow leadership within the system. So a little bit less, we have one leader, and more we have a leader who is helping to develop leaders and opportunities for leadership. So I don't know if that would go in strategic leadership, or if that didn't come up for you at all, then I understand. I may just have heard from a small handful. But I do think that, kind of as we've spoken in the past, to align the strategic plan with management and funding for that plan. I don't know if we can maybe combine how we manage leadership, kind of going in circles right now, and how we look at strategic leadership, right? So I guess maybe your thoughts on if there's a way to look at that last bullet point, if we're splitting up financial and managerial leadership, to combine some of that.
Okay, Mr. Wilson, to be followed by Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you. Hopefully everybody is hearing me, because I've been told that my mic wasn't picking up my voice earlier. So I just had a couple of questions first, and then something that I think isn't picked up in here. In the first, advocate for all children, you've highlighted guiding the system and closing achievement gaps. And was that a consistent response? That's the reason why that got folded in there versus all of the other goals that we have as a as a system. Can you just give me a little background as how that language ended up in there?
That often came up as an issue in community meetings, particularly in communities that they felt they were underserved, of closing the achievement gaps that exist within the system.
Certainly, it's been an ongoing problem that has been intractable. So that's certainly an important goal. I just wonder about including it in a superintendent search characteristic, because it's under the heading of advocate for all children, and so obviously that the sentence puts a preference in terms of it closing the achievement gap as one aspect, which that sort of drills down to one policy consideration that we have, because I just wonder whether or not they're inconsistent, those two concepts. And I would suggest that rather than change the sentence, I would say that the heading, advocate for all children, maybe isn't the right phrasing we want. I mean, because frankly, you're an advocate for a specific group of children. Generally they're an advocate for sleep, or they're advocate for AAP, or an advocate for, and I think that maybe asks too much from our superintendent to be an equal advocate for every different type of child, and that's really not what the sentence actually goes to. So I would say that maybe that those headings, advocate for all staff, advocate for all children, maybe could be adjusted to be a more general descriptor. And I would say, in addition to that, nowhere in here do I see any reference to parents as being a critical group that we have to be mindful of. And I would go back to some of the results of the survey that showed the parent group having great disparities between the perception of the administration. So I would recommend that we make changes along those lines.
Okay, Ms. McLaughlin, followed by Ms. Evans.
I support the input that my colleagues have shared so far. I do think that where I understand the third bullet on boardsmanship expertise, I think it's just wanting to get past the jargon and maybe something that's a little more descriptive. What I was looking at, I think, is somehow how do you capture the strong executive functioning skills that a true leader has in developing collaborations and partnerships with the different stakeholders. And I think that's kind of where you're going with that. Definitely like the idea of having financial standalone, and then the managerial leadership, again, kind of going more toward collapsing in with that advocate for staff, because as others have noted, the whole commitment to guiding and supporting your staff and creating a healthy work environment, someone who, people feeling like that's a key piece of it. I didn't see that language about, certainly a healthy work environment might be a way to kind of capture that in the second bullet. As someone who's worked on the successful children youth policy team, Skip, you've heard us talk about, maybe Hank, I think Tammy's correct. We really do want to see if we can capture that in, because it's a key component of where both the board of supervisors and the school system have been trying to promote this equity for all in the county. And so I think it's a strong word that helps further the board demonstrating its commitment to that. But otherwise, I think in the end, you've captured the key areas of what we're looking for in a great leader, and now it's a matter of inspiring superintendents around the country who are going to be excited by this and want to come here.
Okay, Ms. Evans.
Thank you. I'm basically going to agree with people who've gone before me. Hank, I think you've done a fine job of pulling this together. First of all, I agree with Mr. Moon about that kind of stopped me a little bit, the advocate for staff. I think we could just change that heading to, I don't know, support, inspire and support, something along those lines. I think that would fix that. I agree with Ms. Derenak Kofax about adding equity in here. I think that's an important value that a number of people have raised. I think our that was shown by the feedback that we got. I agree with Mr. Wilson about including parents in here, talking about parents as partners, talking about listening to parents. You know, parents are certainly, key fundamental parts of our school system, so I think they should be mentioned. The political aspect I agree with too. So I don't. Those are, I think, the main things that I think are important to capture there. And then my only other question is at the very bottom, and this may be a little nitpicky, but eligibility. It says credentials are highly desirable. Isn't that last bullet actually a requirement? The eligibility for Commonwealth of Virginia Superintendent certification? That's not a desirable. Isn't that a requirement?
I think there is an alternative path.
Oh, is
but
there? Okay.
Last time, I don't think you wanted. I think we left it as highly desirable last time because you weren't really interested in the alternative path. The first bullet of experience as a teacher, principal, and district level leader would basically eliminate the alternative path. So I could rephrase that in terms of making.
I thought that was something we had to have, and if it's not, then it's fine to leave it there. Thank you.
And Ms. Huff?
Thank you. So I'll just kind of comment on the comments just so we know kind of where we're heading in consensus. I definitely think replace children with students. And I would also consider placing staff with employees. I just think it sounds a little bit cleaner, not to wordsmith, just if it's going to be a heading. And I have to agree with Mr. Wilson. I feel like we've gone from committing resources to all and then singling out some. And I think although it might be a direction that we've heard that we want to go, it's clearly a part of our strategic plan. It's led into by proven track record in, and from my time on the board and listening to all the conversations, it's not something unique to Fairfax County. It's something that is tackled among the nations and all states. And so I'm not sure that it's needs to be specifically laid out here as well as we're looking for a superintendent. And definitely agree with separating financial and managerial, heading managerials up towards employees. A good manager is definitely going to guide and support our employees well. I think that is a key managerial leadership characteristic. So otherwise, that is all I have.
I would just say that I'm going to disagree with you and Mr. Wilson on whether we should leave closing achievement gaps in there. I do think if you read the sentence, you've got the "and" there, right? So we need someone who serves all children's needs and most especially has some experience and success, I hope, in finding the, whatever the solution is for closing achievement gaps. It is, of all the things that we do, it is the one glaring area of need. It's the area where we continue to not meet our goals. And so I think it rises to the top of almost every conversation that I have with significant parts of the community. So I would hate to take that out. I think we need to signal to the community and to candidates that this is very important work for us. I'm sorry, Mrs. Schultz?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm going to kind of be an anchor in the other direction. I'm sure it's no surprise. I think now that I see this highlighted, calling out areas of one need of student in a document like this it is not reflective of all the needs that exist within our school system. I mean, unless you're going to say, and, maintaining the highest, parameters of excellence. I mean, the bottom line is anybody applying for this job is going to have a pretty good idea of the composite of children. And I don't care what school district you go to, closing achievement gaps is something that's resident, it's native language to any school system. And I don't think that presupposes, to the extent that it should be called out at the top of this document, at the top of this advert, if you will, to the exclusion of all the other types of needs. And this is something I have a constituent who, for better or for worse, has connoted the phrase RK, the regular kids. What happens to the regular kids? And there is often this feeling that, we spend a lot of time talking about kind of both ends of the spectrum, and there is this, hey, I don't have a stellar whatever, and I don't have a child that's in, tremendous need. And so I think it's more inclusive to be a little bit more 30,000 foot level in this piece.
Okay, Ms. Jarnakovacs, did you have a go back?
I do. And since I'm so glad we're not wordsmithing, I will leave this up to Hank. A compromise could be perhaps to add, some of the language, what Ms. Schultz was talking about, making sure we reach from the highest achieving to, the learners in the middle, and, remediation, acceleration, all of those in between, and closing achievement gaps, and keeping that in there, because then, you can come up with the language, but that's the kind of compromise I'm willing to go for, because I think, and I almost said that before, but I didn't, because I didn't have the words in my head, but I think that might be a compromise then.
Would it help, as I was thinking about it and listening to this conversation, that the vast majority of comments that you've all made are pretty much in alignment of advocate for staff and managerial leadership somehow fits together in terms of a concept. Financial leadership should be a standalone item. Somehow boardsmanship needs to change in terms of the language of the leadership there. Effective communication and engagement needs to include parents. Somehow working in political expertise to be able to deal with this environment here, and also maybe in the skill set or the experiences, demonstrated track record of success in working in high expectation, diverse communities with changing economic needs, because you talked about the changing demographics to include that. So the one place that I hear some differences is around the advocate for all children. Does it help to have advocate for all children focus on the skill set for the superintendent of helping all children succeed and meet their potential, address the equity kinds of issues across the system, and to move the closing to achievement gap kinds of expertise as part of instructional leadership? So that the advocate for all children is focusing on the needs of all children across the spectrum, the issues of equity across all communities within the system. And if you want to keep closing achievement gap as a skill set, it fits under instructional leadership as a skill set.
I could live with that, for sure, as long as it's in there. Thank you, Hank. I think you've heard. I think Hank has reflected. I have go-backs from Ilyang and Janie.
Okay, I want to throw this out for my colleagues' consideration and feedback. If you look at the bottom of the page, the following leadership experiences, accomplishments, and credentials are highly desirable. I don't know what highly desirable means, but we included doctoral degree as a highly desirable element for candidates. I mean, first two definitely agree. I mean, that shows the person's background as an educator, having gone through a certain level of experiences. But doctoral degree, it could be anything. Doctoral degree in something completely not related to education. So I don't know what value that brings. But at the same time, when you include that as an element of highly desirables, that might limit, that might give deters, some other very highly skilled really excellent candidates from applying
Who doesn't have a doctorate?
who does not have a doctorate.
Okay.
It could be Mr. Tom Wilson.
Yeah, I think maybe, so that's throwing out a new question here, Mr. Moon, that maybe we could get a sense of the board on. I don't know if people are prepared. Whether you want to change that to just take it out completely, or to, earned graduate degree in something. I mean, what's your advocacy, Mr. Moon?
My advocacy is something less than highly desirable. I mean, I certainly give respect anyone who has.
You're saying take out
Received.
highly, or
Would you like
desirable?
to preferred?
Preferred?
I mean, I could live with the preferred, but I could also live with completely taking that one out from that, because again, it could be from completely irrelevant, area of a, doctoral degree.
Okay, well, I mean, I don't know, but I think if I were a candidate looking at this, and it's maybe a show of hands to take out, we have to okay, all right. All right, let's go.
Someone could have a PhD in history versus, a doctor of education. I mean, even for the doctor of education, I don't know whether that should be a part of a limiting factor, deterring excellent candidates from applying.
Hey, and before I move on, I do have some other board members who want to speak to. Hank, did you have any particular reason for putting that in? Is it what we did last time?
Those were in last time.
All right, thank you.
Those were the ones that those were the same as what was there last time. So and I think we had this discussion last time. Part of it was, I think we originally talked about an earned doctorate in education from an accredited university, and there was some desire last time to make that more open, that it didn't have to be education. There was strong sentiment last time about teacher experience as a teacher, principal, district level leader, track record of working in a high expectation, diverse community, of understanding that. And we could make the eligibility for a superintendent certificate as a requirement as opposed to highly desirable. So, I mean, part of this issue is you want to keep the opportunity as broad as possible without creating false expectation. So you don't want somebody to not apply because they don't have something, because as you review their application, you're going to have a chance to say, yes, we want to see this person, no, we don't want to see this person, in relationship to the work that they've done, their accomplishments, the experiences that they've had, because we're going to review those applications on March 2nd. So it's at this point in time, I think keeping the characteristics as open as possible is probably more advisable than definitive. But by the same extent, if you're not going to consider somebody who doesn't have a certain qualification, I don't want to take the time to vet them and explore them as a possibility and learn about them if there's absolutely no way this board would consider them as a potential candidate.
Okay.
So,
Thank you. So I've got Ms. Strauss. I'm sorry, did you want to?
Yeah, having heard that, I'm more certain that should not be a highly desirable, element as far as the requirements are
take it off.
concerned. Because I'm not going to looking at the resume and say, PhD, doesn't have a PhD. So that I am not going to do that.
Okay. Ms. Strauss, Ms. McLaughlin, and then Ms. Corbett-Sanders.
I do believe that whoever we hire, they have to be eligible to get the Virginia Superintendent certification, because I know Dr. Garza, and it just has, it's either they have to show their certification and yada, yada, yada. It is though they already have it, but that they are eligible to get it. I do want to see advanced degrees. I want to see advanced educational degrees. I will look for that. I am not particularly interested in an alternative candidate comes out of a totally different field. I mean, those were things that we talked about the last time. I am looking for an educator. When we say experience as a teacher, principal, and district level leader, that continues, I think, to be extremely important. That's high expectations from our own staff. They want to know that they have a soulmate and who comes here. So I would not want to take out the whole earned doctorate from an accredited university. I would think advanced degrees, that's where I would be.
Well, if you require the eligibility, if we make that a requirement as opposed to desirability,
so that may be.
You're going to have an advanced degree
Yes.
to be eligible for
Exactly.
the certificate. You won't necessarily have to have a doctorate. You could have a CAS,
Right.
and you could have done all the coursework to
Right.
qualify for the certificate.
Okay.
But you'd have to have a master's degree and
Yeah, because
work beyond that to be
Right.
eligible for that certificate.
because in our own, I mean, whoever we hire for anything, they have to have advanced degrees to be a director of student activities, to be an AP, to be a principal. So there is an accreditation process for advanced degrees, or you are not considered for those jobs. And certainly, superintendent, I think, needs to show that they have also valued formal education in their own career.
And Ms. McLaughlin?
I'm going to try really hard to take a super deep breath here. In my mind, it is absolutely without question that we want to be putting in there highly desirable to have a doctorate. What it requires of a superintendent of the 10th largest school system in the country to be able to analyze data reports and understand them is the work that's done at the doctoral level. And if it was somebody to be a CEO of a company, I wouldn't necessarily say you have to have a doctorate. You could have an MBA and that would be fine. But as Ms. Strauss pointed out, we are an educational system and one of the premier in the country. And one of the things we've talked about and the public has indicated they want is data-driven decision-making, evidence-based research. And that takes skills and a degree in learning how to do that in the most advanced level. Most of our leadership team that does that kind of work, especially in instructional services, Dr. Duran, Dr. Presidio, they have that training. And to not have a superintendent, and also Dr. Lockhart, if you don't have that and you're managing all the people who do that, how on earth are you going to be able to be the executive who can look at the reports coming to you and say, this is good work, or this is, I don't think we quite got there. I don't even know how to read that report. I mean, so it's one thing that the public doesn't expect its 12 board members to have doctorates in education, but when it comes to the superintendent, I can't even imagine advertising for this position and not, I mean, the fact that it's highly desirable gives wiggle room as it is, but unlike Mr. Moon, it would be next to impossible for me to be comfortable seeing someone assume the superintendency here without doctoral training, because I think understanding that level of research and those types of reports, you need that skill training.
Okay, so I have Ms. Corbett Sanders, Mrs. Schultz, and Ms. Derenak Kofax, and then maybe we could get a sense of the board on this. So, Ms. Corbett Sanders?
I have a slightly different view of this than my colleague, Mr. Moon. I think that having a doctorate is something that is important as far as credibility with the team in which this person will lead. However, I do agree that we should be casting the net wide, and I would be more likely to suggest that experience as a teacher, principal, district level leader, or possibly as the leader of a, community college system that has diverse learners in it or something else, because that would be a bold experience that they would obviously have the financial expertise, they would have the academic leadership expertise, they would understand some of the equity and diversity challenges that we're facing. And so if we are trying to cast the net wide, I don't think we want to limit their academic experience as much as, and we certainly don't want to limit the experience of outside of the traditional education system or public school system.
Mrs. Schultz, then Ms. Derenak Kofax.
This is sometimes where I think we make our work harder than it has to be. We did this. Hank very kindly brought us not only an updated version, but the things that were resident before. And if we looked for it before, I'm not exactly sure why we're expending the board's valuable time when we're hours behind our agenda. renegotiating something that we already put out. It is somewhat incomprehensible that in a division our size, with the highest educated parent base in the country, that we would not look for somebody with a doctorate and indicate that it's highly desirable. It doesn't say, I appreciate, Hank, you saying you don't want to put out false hope. It doesn't put out false hope to say it's highly desirable, and for somebody who says, okay, well, highly desirable, I don't have it, but I have commensurate experience. If you want to throw commensurate experience in there, I disagree with my colleague, Ms. Strauss. I think our net needs to be cast wide. We had a certain bent last time, and we know how that worked out, which is why we're back in the thick of it again. So I think we keep our options open, but let's not reinvent the wheel. We did this. Let's leave it up there and not kill our agenda for the rest of the evening.
Ms. Darnett, Kofax, and Ms. Evans, and then maybe we will try to get a sense and move on.
I think if you keep it highly desirable, you allow both ends of this argument to coexist. My personal preference is that this person would have a doctorate for many of the reasons that some of my colleagues. It's that we several people on the staff have that. I think you need to look at making sure that there is a certain, particularly in this profession, we are a school system, and we have, education is our primary business, and a doctorate is the highest, demarcation of your commitment to that field. And I think anything less than that, I get the wide net, but on the first blush, I'm not for the wide net. I think, and all I'll say to that is, we tried this with another position and a wide net didn't work, and I think we need to be very specific about what we want from this position.
Okay, I have Ms. Evans.
I think it's fine the way it is up there.
Okay, so can I get a show of hands? Who's okay with leaving it as is? I'm sorry, bullet number 3, down at the bottom, an earned doctorate from an accredited university. Okay, well, thank you for your thoughts, Mr. Moon, but I think, who's opposed?
No, my lawyer objection.
Okay, thank you. Noted objection. Okay. All right, so Hank, how are we?
I think we're in good shape.
Okay.
I will get a revised copy of the desired characteristics back to you probably sometime tomorrow and email them to you. Try to get the revisions that you talked about conceptually done and clean up the language, and ask for any questions that you may have to respond to me one-on-one. Remember, you can't have this dialogue with each other. You can only respond back to me with any questions or concerns that you have, or we're going to violate the Open Meetings Act. So make sure that you only reply to me and not reply to all in terms of your thoughts, and then we'll get that information back out to you. But I would like to get this, try to get this revised in terms of the concepts that you have quickly. So our last task is to really define the groups that you want to have to invite to send participants to serve on the stakeholder committee, who will meet the 3 finalists at the end of March. And you received a copy of those a couple of weeks ago. Do you still have those, Eileen? That's the one. That's the one we were going to work off of in terms of those were the groups that you sent an invitation to say, please send a representative who can serve on the committee. The requirements of serving on that committee were that they could attend the planning session that we set up and then the 3 days of interviewing. And it's just as a recollection that the candidate who's one of the 3 finalists would come in the afternoon to meet with the committee. I would facilitate those interviews, collect the debriefing information from the committee in a written format that they agree to, and give that information to you prior to your second interview with that candidate. and it's shared in a written format. They list their ideas, and then if you remember, they were highlighted with what were the consensus ideas that came across from the whole committee.
And also to remember, so this was after the board had gone through the initial list of potential candidates and then interviewed one round, and we could end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, you know, for this second round for the community group. All right, so we're looking at the list of stakeholder groups that were that we chose last time. After everyone has a chance to take another look at it, let me know if you think we should change anything. Ms. McLaughlin?
I just have a process question. I know we're focused on this right now, but I couldn't help but hear when Hank mentioned March 2nd, and today's January 13th, February. Thank you. That's why my alarm bell went off. It's February 13th. So it's a little concerning to me, this window of advertising to look at superintendent candidacies. And if we're not going to be publishing this until when?
The vacancy has been published for months.
Right.
So people have started applying. There are some people who have applied online. I've talked to about 24 candidates who have expressed some level of interest in the position, and they're waiting for additional information about the desired characteristics before they finalize their applications. I intend to have the applications posted on the portal for you to be able to review them 4 or 5 days before we meet on March 2nd to go over them and review them. And if you remember the last time we did this, and for the people who are new to the board, we divided those applicants into recommended candidates who we thought were a really good match for your profile, possible candidates that might have some consideration in terms of some of the characteristics you're looking for, and then the other applicants who really didn't appear to be a match. So you could focus your attention on the applications.
So I do appreciate that, and I can see how it's possible that after you finalize that desired characteristics and it gets posted, and then they can shape their final responses until then. But I guess in terms of who we or where we then advertised, I mean, like you said, it's been posted, but so did it go into all of that went in, and it was just sort of, even though we hadn't finished our leadership profile, you kind of went with what you were hearing?
We talked about the vacancy in terms of, so people are aware of the vacancy.
Okay.
I have had lots and lots and lots of conversations that I have a good 15 phone calls scheduled for the next couple of days to finalize information for potential candidates as they make their final decisions about submitting an application based on the desired characteristics. So I'm not worried about the timeline at this point in time as to whether candidates will be ready to have their materials ready for your review.
Okay.
Thank you. Maybe if we could focus on this list of groups, and we had it up there, but I think that board members might want to be able to pull it up on their computers. Could you forward the email that you're putting up there for us again so that we can grab it?
Yep. So it is posted, but you have to refresh.
But this is a public meeting, and so we have to take the password protection off.
It's on public board docs.
Okay, so refresh your board docs, everybody, and it should show up. Is that what we're saying?
Right,
Okay.
and is it on public?
You did.
Yeah, it does need to be.
Okay, well, let's make sure, if we can, please.
It does need to be on public.
Clerks, okay, thank you. We'll get that. Thank you. Okay, so we should have in front of us now this list of groups, and I'd like to focus on that. And then Ms. Huff and I were saying, as meeting managers, before we close today, we would like to take a look at the next steps and the calendar, just so we're all refreshed about that. Okay, so it is under Board Docs now, 2013 Soup Search Stakeholder Committee. Open. Oh, yeah, I have to use my, okay. All right, anyone like to speak to this? Yes, Ms. Palchik.
Yes, for the community one, I believe as a liaison to the foundation board, It says one representative from Fairfax County Chamber of Commerce. My understanding, we would like it to be one representative from the foundation board, which includes the Chamber of Commerce and others. I don't know if they were hoping for both, but I know that the foundation is asking that they have a representative.
Okay, and that also, that it's no longer called the Fairfax County Chamber of Commerce too, so we probably need to change that anyway. Your recommendation is that we change it to the
My
foundation?
understanding from our last meeting last week was
Oh, I'm
that
sorry.
it would be, and I think Ms. Evans received a letter or should be receiving one from Ms. Murphy, is that the foundation as a whole is hoping to have a seat at the table. I don't know if, I guess if that would replace the Chamber of Commerce seat, or if they're asking for both.
Ms.
But
Evans? I'm sorry.
So I've received a request from the foundation and also from the NAACP too, and so I'm going to put those requests out there.
So you're talking about adding them, the foundation and the NAACP?
That's what's being requested, so I throw that out there for consideration.
Okay, I'll keep a list, and then that's also, so Ms. Palchik, your recommendation is that we replace the Fairfax County Chamber of Commerce with the foundation?
Well, first of all, right, as you said, it's not the Chamber of Commerce anymore. I don't know if they would like to both have their own seat, keeping in mind we have many chambers of commerce that represent Fairfax County, and they do sit on the board of the foundation, but I know that the foundation is asking to have a seat at the table, especially as they continue to do building work to bring more stakeholders into the community, working with the businesses in the community. So I know the foundation would definitely like to have a seat. I guess it would require another conversation with Ms. Murphy as to whether it would be one seat or keeping one seat for the chamber and one for the foundation.
Okay, so I'm just asking to see what questions we have to kind of decide on as a group. So I think you're putting out there the question whether we want to have, and it would be the Northern Virginia, the NOVA Chamber, isn't that what they call themselves now?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
All right. Anyone else? Anyone have any thoughts about whether or not we need to have the NOVA Chamber on, or other ideas? Ms. McLaughlin?
So in terms of looking at the under parent groups, so it was shared with me that perhaps they're looking to have one parent from each of the 5 regions. I don't know if anybody heard that input.
I can speak to that too. I did have a conversation with Kimberly Adams, primarily because I do remember the last time that we did this, we said that the FCCPTA would do this, and we hadn't actually run it by them before we said that. So this time I figured we better do that. And so Ms. Adams said that she would be fine with that, taking on this responsibility, which was a significant responsibility on their part. And so she was going to get in touch with Ramona Morrow, who did this for the FCCPTA the last time. They had an application process, and they did a good job of getting regional diversity. So as to how they would do it, whether it's one per region or some other geographic, they're aware that we want socioeconomic diversity and geographic diversity.
So, yeah, so I think that's a good approach to have, because our regions do sort of reflect all parts of the county, and so I think that's our easiest way of making sure we have that representation. I do also see that we have MSAOC listed here as before, and as the liaison to MSAOC, I know that we have 3 of the prior chairs of MSAOC here this afternoon in support of that representation, and so I do think we should continue doing that like we did before. But I mean, overall, I also support the input from Ms. Palchik that because the superintendent interfaces with the foundation board so much, I think that would be very useful. And then in terms of the representative from the Fairfax County Federation of Civic Associations, my only thinking on that one, and I would just like other board members to maybe weigh in, is if we would want that person to maybe ideally be someone who's on the Federation leadership level, because I think it's really important that typically someone who's serving at the leadership level of the Fairfax Federation has been involved for an extended period of time, is knowledgeable about our schools, and I think that matters when you're talking about a responsibility of this magnitude.
Okay, thanks. I have Ms. Strauss, then Ms. Schultz. I'm sorry, Ms. Evans, then Ms. Schultz. I apologize.
Okay, well, I've said a couple of the things I was going to mention, but I would urge that we do go with the request to add the foundation and to add the NAACP as members of the community as well. I don't know if we feel that we want to remove anyone. I'm fine with just adding if it were up to me. I don't feel as strongly about the college representatives, but I don't have any objection to that. So I think this is, it was a good mix the last time, and I think it's a good mix this time, but I would suggest those two additions.
Okay, so Ms. Strauss, then Ms. Schultz.
Okay, fine to add the foundation. I've already heard from George Mason. They very much want to have representation again, very, very much, because they work very closely with us. So I want to keep them there. One of our challenges in making sure that we have diversity from our own community, realizing that our largest, I mean, we are so diverse in our Hispanic community, our African American community, our Asian community. I don't know how we make sure that we get all of that. One would hope that who comes from MSAOC has the breadth of representing everybody. So that would be, because if we have the NAACP in addition to MSAOC, we just need the breadth, because that's the reality of who we are, and we care about all of our kids. And our language minorities, because that is a huge sector of us. But I think that is, and the business community is definitely, we need to include them, and I guess it's a different title this time. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, Mrs. Schultz.
Two things. I'm trying to remember on this list. Didn't we have FEC last time? I mean, if this is the exact list from last time. Yeah, where are all the parent advocacy groups?
I don't think we included advocacy groups. We included parents and asked the PTAs to select those representatives. But I think the discussion went, if you started picking individual advocacy groups, we were going to have.
Okay. All right. So while fundamentally I agree with Ms. Strauss that we shouldn't necessarily be removing people, I will say that I don't know how many civic associations, FCA, Fairfax County Federation of Civic Associations, I don't know how much that represents, because I have civic associations that are not a part of this. And so I feel like, just like then, if the answer is on the former, that we're not going to weight one parent group against, then I don't really see that they have a position, because I have civic associations that represent enormous communities that have no role in the Fairfax County Federation. So their voice would not be heard. So I feel like this is shunting a position to something that doesn't necessarily, it isn't representative of all the civic associations. So I am in favor of the college positions. I understand the point of not having the parents, but or the parent advocacy groups, but that's one that I don't see has a commensurate role.
Okay, Ms. Palchik, followed by Mr. Wilson. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, Ms. Palchik.
Okay, thank you. I had a question. I guess I was wondering, for the staff representation, did we also take into consideration what we're asking the parents to be kind of representative of the community? Is there a way to ask that of the staff representation as well? Try to get geographically, socioeconomically diverse voices on the staff side, or is that a little too
I think that went out in the letter that we asked them to, as they picked representatives.
Okay, because I know they're different groups, but when we look at them all together, we're able to kind of have a good mix.
To that point, my recollection is that 3 organizations, they talk to each other. I think they picked one from high school level, middle school, and elementary school. I think that's what they did. They talked to each 3 organizations. They did.
You mean the principal organizations
No.
or the
Principal organization is only one representative.
right? Okay.
Teachers, 3 teacher
the 3
organizations,
teachers will talk to
they
each
talked
other.
and then send high school, middle school, and elementary school.
Okay, but that's half of the staff. So I'm wondering the other 3.
I don't know the other half. I don't know what you see. Principal, leadership, and support employee.
Yeah, I'm just, I know we're a very diverse district, right, for a lot of reasons. So if there's a way when those so we're just asking them to pick the one person, but there's no kind of oversight or discussion about the group as a whole.
Well, because there's only 6 of them, it's kind of hard, but
Yeah, I
anyway,
understand.
Mr. Wilson, then Mr. McIlvain, then Ms. Huff.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. I'd like to see some representation for parents of children with disabilities on there. So I know there are a lot of groups, and I don't know which one would be the best one, but I know, for example, there's a parents group for children with autism of Northern Virginia and other groups that work directly and help that population within Fairfax County Public Schools. And it is a really large segment of the student population has IEPs. So I would like to see some representation within this group of somebody that can be a voice for that group. And knowledge about the IDEA obviously has been in the news recently, and I think that's an important aspect of like what they see in the
Just as a point of reference, when we asked for the parent representatives to factor in all of those kinds of issues as they selected people to think about all the various student groups. I would recommend that you don't pick individual advocacy groups, because I think if you pick one, you have to pick them all. And so if you're going to have special ed, you should have gifted, you should have ELL, you should have a whole lot of other ones. And then you're starting to dictate to the parent group that you're asking to send
Right.
their representatives.
just along those lines, so you would recommend that we not include the NAACP or the Minority Student Achievement?
The Minority
committee?
Student Achievement was a group that that represented across the entire district. And so that was one of the groups
Yeah.
that they included last time.
Yeah, I understand. So obviously, I don't have a group in mind specifically, because obviously, system-wide, there is the whole range of disabilities. So, but I suspect there probably is an organization that we could call on to have representation that represents the disabled population of students.
Okay, Mr. McIlvain, followed by Ms. Huff.
Sandy, I had to step out of the room. What was your advocacy on FCCPTA?
Oh, I just said that I had spoken with Kimberly Adams about it, and they were open and happy to help us with that. The last time we asked them to do it before asking them if they were capable of doing it. So she said they're fine with that. She's going to talk with Ramona Morrow about how they did it the last time, because they had a whole application process. And so it wasn't so much advocacy as just the information that they're prepared to do it for us again this time.
Okay, my advocacy on that point is that we designate that at least 4 of the 5 members come from the outside of the executive board of FCCPTA. So the exec board would have 1 spot, and then the rest would be from around the county representing these various groups. So that way you're hearing different voices.
Okay, noted. Ms. Huff?
Great. That'll actually be a good segue to Mr. McIlvain's, because I completely agree. I guess I'd be curious for Hank to see the application that the council sends out. I'm appreciative that they'll help. I have concern that a couple of people have the control to pick 5 of 6 parents. There is a wide parent population out there that all have different views, and if a couple of people are selecting 5 of those people, even if well-intentioned, I think that it could skew a little bit the feedback that we're getting. I don't know a different way to do it. I could certainly think upon it, but I do have concern with that. Also, clearly it's appropriate to have 3 from the teacher associations, but we have a huge teacher population that are not a part of these associations, and I think we should try and capture a couple of those. It's not a requirement to be part of it, and I think that it makes sense to try and reach some of that population. So I'm glad we have the representative from the Minority Student Achievement Oversight Committee. I think if we add the NAACP, we're going to be opening ourselves to need to add many more. And so that will need to be a topic of conversation. And I do advocate that we keep the Chamber of Commerce involved. And, I actually had written down an idea for another teacher. Look at that. I had written maybe we reach out to somebody like the Teacher of the Year from last year, or somebody who we recognize, but in a different way. So just make sure that's all I had. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I had a couple, I have some go-backs, but I thought I would go ahead and speak just for a second. I wonder if maybe it makes sense if, when we send a letter, which I assume we'll do, to the FCCPTA leadership, giving them sort of guidance in how to select the people they pick, maybe the board could see that letter before it goes to the FCCPTA leadership, just because I think we have some opinions about what it should say, or do you have any thoughts on that?
So you mean to see how specific we want to get? My recollection from the last time, Mr. McElveen, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think they took it primarily from their executive board. They put out an application, and I believe they picked parents from among applicants, and they tried to get a mix of people, not just geographically, but with different, different profiles, different interests. I would have to go back to the specifics to see who was on there, but I believe most of the parents were, just regular people who applied.
I would just recommend being explicit.
And say we want it to be. Okay. So I guess we can be as specific as we want to be. If we wanted to put more of our thoughts on that.
Okay, well, it's just a suggestion because we've had a few ideas about that, I thought. But for me, I think we need to continue to include the Federation. It really is the only, of civic associations, it's the only organization in the county that makes an effort to gather the thoughts of civic associations. And, I think we need that, if for no other reason than to show that we're interested in their opinion about the new superintendent. And they do advocate for us. The Federation advocates for the school system, for revenue and other things with the county. I do think we should add the foundation. I agree. I think that's going to be important. I also think we should keep the chamber. The chamber does not represent all the chambers, but I think we have to make an effort to get someone from the business community on there, and that's probably the best. I also am worried about, we have lots of advocacy groups, and I think, Mr. Wilson, you're right, the Students with Disabilities Advocacy Group is one of our largest and most passionate and interested and engaged, but I worry that once we do that, we open the gates for all the other advisory groups that we have for different student groups and parent groups, and I'm afraid it kind of opens the floodgates, which is why I'm interested in hearing from other board members about the NAACP. I think it's a really important organization, but if we have someone from MSAOC, I wonder if we're doubling up by having MSAOC and the NAACP. Okay, I have go-backs from Ms. Strauss, Ms. McLaughlin, and Ms. Palchik.
Okay, I agree that the Federation should be a part. We have to have some way to reach out to people who represent taxpayers and real estate, and the Federation does do that. It gets at another broad advocacy group. So I agree that we need to include them. The last time this grouping served us very, very well, and the fact that we were able to step way back so that we are not appointing people. The other piece that worked very well, and I hope would work again, is their agreement that they could attend the events. It's a very tight turnaround. and confidentiality. Because that was a bit of a risk when we decided to do this the last time. The confidentiality is absolutely critical. And so it's when we are asking other organizations who are credible and understand sort of the parameters of this, so they take it very seriously as to who they're going to appoint. And this whole piece, it just worked flawlessly the last time. I was very, very pleased with how responsible people were. And again, we agreed on how large the group would be or how small the group would be. And if we're going to do a cast of 60, then you can include everybody, but it's just not practical. Because again, to keep it a tight, dedicated group, the PTAs the last time did a nice job of giving us a very nice range. They take that responsibility very seriously, so that, because we are diverse. I have to acknowledge I have PTOs that will not be a part of this. I'm sorry. I wish they were, but they're not. And there is no mechanism, because I don't have a central way to do that. And I would not want to go to a just apply and we'll pick somebody out of the hat, because then this group has to be so responsible and agreeable and understand the importance of their participation and what we set out there. Because if they are not fair players in how they do this and we break that confidentiality, we could lose the entire adventure, and that would be terrible. And their feedback the last time was so helpful. So I would want to stay pretty much within sort of the parameters that we had before. I think it served us extremely well.
Okay, so I have 4 more go-backs, and then I think we should try to see if there are any items that we have to get a sense of the board on and try to finalize this. Ms. McLaughlin, Ms. Palchik, Ms. Darren at Kofax, and Ms. Schultz.
So in terms of the Fairfax County Chamber, one question I have is, Jerry Gordon and the Economic Development Authority, the EDA, they're probably one of our biggest voices in terms of the business sector. So I would be curious why we aren't necessarily pulling from them, since they're truly the economic engine. So that's one thing I wanted to just kind of have everybody consider. In terms of the NAACP, I think we're all supportive of wanting to be inclusive, but the bottom line is then we have to start saying, well, what other organizations did we not consider? And I think that providing a seat at the table with MSAOC is really our way of saying we're a school system that's trying to close achievement gaps and really represent all. And so I think that can be accomplished with that. In terms of the point that Ms. Strauss was making about PTOs, I would like to suggest, and to me, it's really the more equitable approach to this whole thing is, while the FCC PTA is willing to vet the applications as the parent arm, I absolutely think a KIT message needs to go out. It needs to be going into every parent's email box that they can apply. I don't know why we would leave it to the communication mechanism of FCC PTA. This is something we need to control, at least in terms of ensuring access of parents being able to apply who are interested in this and, may not be on the radar with FCC PTA. So that would be my strong advocacy, that it's great that they're willing to vet it, but I don't think it should be exclusive to only those who might get a FCC PTA mailer. That is absolutely not what FCC PTA is, the exclusive arm of that. So one thing I did think about is I still like the idea of one from each region, and then I would fully support adding one extra parent, so it would be 7 instead of 6, and that would be someone from the executive board of the FCC PTA, just because when you serve on the executive board, you are more intensely involved in the school system and what's going on, and so I think that's a valuable voice to have there. But I really do like the idea of not taking away from this approach of getting one from each region. So that would be my advocacy there. But I can't emphasize enough saying that the communication and the applications are just going to be however FCCPA FCCPTA is going to advertise it, I think that we would be greatly remiss in our responsibility of allowing each and every parent who's interested to apply.
Ms. Palchik?
Thank you. 3 additional points, and I think whether it's Chamber of Commerce or EDA, maybe that's a conversation to have with them and see if they have a recommendation as well. I know Jerry Gordon used to be the head of the foundation, so that would have been an easier point. Now he's not. When it comes to this, I'm wondering, do we ever include, or do we need to include members from the city of Fairfax in our community group? Are we assuming that they will be represented geographically? So that would be one to think about. I don't see them specifically on here. Students, I know we only have 2 students right now, and at least a possibility of 6 people from every other group. So I don't know if we could have 3 students to try to make it be a little bit more representative of our student population. If the SAC were to choose 2 to complement the student representative on the board, I would advocate for adding at least 1 more student to the group. And finally, to Ms. McLaughlin's point, I'd be open to the idea of having it be a joint communication from the school board and the FCCPTA to parents, so we ensure everyone receives the message, but being vetted through the FCCPTA. But regardless, I definitely want to ensure that the FCCPTA as a member organization and the Fairfax County Federation of Civic Associations as a member organization are the ones helping lead that and ensure that our community groups have that strength and are pulling from their membership. And if they would like to go outside their membership, that's fine. But I think it's important to have them as civic leaders in our community helping lead that effort.
Okay, Ms. Derenak-Kovacs?
Yes, I'm sorry, but I had to step out, so I might have missed this part of the conversation. But for the chamber, there's the new chamber that's reorganized, the Northern Virginia one, but there's also regional ones, and I think there is real merit because the regional ones they represent the regions and they look at the school system differently. And I will speak specifically to the one that represents me in South Fairfax Chamber. They were quite supportive of the meals tax and the funding needs of the schools. And I think it's important that we talk about these things. When we talk about regional representatives, I think, regional from the different chambers, because there's several different chambers. You just don't have to take the largest one because it's the largest. And then the other thing, when Ms. McLaughlin was talking about that, I think, and when Ms. Palchik, whoever was talking about the students, it would be, I think, of great merit to have a student from each of the regions, because that's just, and I know we worry about how unwieldy the group can get, but there is a real different perspective of students and what they need. And if you're talking about all those things, characteristics, what to look for, I think a student rep from each of the regions. I'm not exactly sure, you could go to SGAs, whatever you could do, because you want a child that's engaged and kind of understands the process. But I definitely think a student from one high school or another high school, in our region has very different perspectives. So I don't want to get too, what? Right. Oh, that's right. That's true. Yes. So I don't want it to get too unwieldy, but with the chamber group and the student group, I want to maybe look more broadly than one representative.
So one more go back. We have a lot of new ideas here. So after Mrs. Schultz, maybe I'll turn to Hank and ask how much of this we have to decide tonight. Yes, Mr. Moon?
Am I on the list?
Oh, no, I'll put you on the list. Mrs. Schultz, please.
So I guess interesting, Ms. Hines, that's a little bit where I was going to go. I was going to look and say, Hank, I sort of feel like we're having a conversation and you're bemusedly watching the zoo from the other side of the glass. I fundamentally have a problem with where this conversation's going. One is we're hearing things thrown on the suggestion list that maybe should have been a part of the engagement process, but are not a part of what this is, which is a lockdown group that has to have a tremendous amount of respect for confidentiality. Part two is we have a very, as much as we like to think this is inclusive, I am telling you right now, you have a very narrow scope of Fairfax County represented here. The majority of our teachers are not in an organization. I agree wholeheartedly with Ms. Huff that a teacher who is not in an organization needs to be on here. I agree wholeheartedly that every single parent in every single school needs to be considered, not just PTAs. More of my schools are no longer PTAs and are going to PTOs or PTSOs or PTSAs or whatever. And with all due deference, I'm just going to say it, the Fairfax County Federation of Civic Associations has become extremely political. And it is political in one direction. And so what we have achieved here is a couple of organizations that have an advocacy group that has a particular bent, and it is not the whole voice. And if we don't listen to the whole voice, it's when we get in trouble. That requires intellectual honesty around the table, and we're either going to have it or we're not. But if we don't have it, eventually we wind up having to pay a bill. And whether it's sitting at board meetings and listening to the outcome, or having to deal with a second superintendent search, or whatever it is. And so it's much more in our interest to be forthright up front and be inclusive of all the voices, rather than try to handpick, groups that will reflect back to us exactly what we want to see. And so I don't think that we need more students. And I'm somebody who advocates all the time for a student voice, but 2 students out of 18 is actually a very large percentage. We need adults, we need adult taxpayers, we need non-parents. I don't see, other than, if by chance some of these other people from the chamber or whatever are non-parents by default, I don't see non-parents. And frankly, the taxpayers are the ones that we go to ask for things, and that didn't turn out well for us last time. So, I want us to think very carefully before we start expanding into non-taxpayers, students, or only parents who belong to only schools of only PTAs, or only teachers who belong to an organization. That does not bode well for us.
Okay, Mr. Moon, then Mr. McElveen.
The last time we had this, I believe the stakeholder committee group, their work, it worked well in my mind. We were able to get the feedback that was very helpful from the committee, and I agree with the board members who talk about, this group of people being able to maintain confidentiality, because we don't want to lose excellent candidates that will come to us in any way. Not necessarily, I do not trust the students, but they are a little younger than grown-ups and might just forget about, maintaining confidentiality. So my recollection is that when we began with forming this group 4 or 5 years ago, that we talked about overall number has to be manageable size. And confidentiality is one of the reasons behind picking 18 at the time. And then we said, okay, how will I pick 18? I said, maybe I'll pick, since the superintendent will have to work with employees, staff, 1/3, we set aside 1/3. And we set aside 1/3 with the parents, and 1/3 others. And others were divided into students, and then community. And students, we said 2 was more than enough. So we picked 2. And 4, how are we going to pick the other 4? And we came down to the 4 on the list. I'm willing to support as is, except for County Chamber of Commerce, because they have at least to change the name. Fairfax County Chamber of Commerce does not exist anymore. So if it is Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce, I'm willing to support that if majority of my colleagues wants to substitute that with the Education Foundation. I can support that too, but my default position is the list as is. And as far as, Elizabeth make a good point, there were other board members that their parents, do not necessarily have to come from just PTA members. And we can help with that by, sending whatever the notice that may go out. In the past, it was county council PTAs did contact their member organizations, member PTAs, but we can send a keep in touch message to them. But all the application could go through county council PTA, and they did a great job in trying to select. If you look at the letter that they sent out, back in 2012, was it? I think Eileen sent us a copy of the letter. That we sent to the PTA, we specified what we were looking for. Trying to be the parent group to be as diverse as possible. It could be grade level, it could be a special education, gifted, or second language minority, geographical distribution. And you may say that with a limited number of parents it's difficult, but that's the number we have, and I think they did a marvelous job last time. I think it worked well. I think just minor tweaking is all that we need. As far as NAACP is concerned, my recollection is that we had that discussion too. And that's one of the reasons how we got MSAOC to pick a representative at the time. So we pick, in as much as, we would like to have input from NAACP. Once you have that, we have a Hispanic Alliance, we have other ethnic groups, they all want to have a, seat at the table. And then group will become unworldly too large for its work. That is where I am drawing my line.
Hey, Mr. McElvain, and then I'm going to try to move on.
I agree 100% with Mr. Moon, and that's very much where I was going. I think we've seen an explosion in terms of where we're trying to fit into this thing. My advocacy would be to start with a vote to do it as is. If that doesn't work, then we move into the other pieces.
Okay, sorry, maybe I was not very helpful in setting this up. I feel like I opened up the floodgates, and now we're... So Hank, do you have any advice for us on this?
Well,
Can I just ask one more thing? Did we not, Mr. Moon, when you were talking about the students, that triggered my mind, didn't we say that the students should be 18, a senior, so that they could sign a non-disclosure agreement?
That's my recollection. So binding agreement could be signed.
I think the important piece to keep in mind is you want the determination of the groups before was based on who represented the broadest perspective of that stakeholder group, not an advocacy group, but the perspective of the entire stakeholder group. Because the thing that we ask the committee members to do is to not come at it from the point of view of advocacy, to come at it from the point of view of looking at the needs of the entire system and have that discussion. So if you're a parent, you're not a parent of elementary students, you're a parent of, you need to look at it from the perspective of a parent of all levels and all needs of students. And so when you identified the groups before, they were identified, as Mr. Moon said, a third stakeholders of parents, a third of staff, and a third of community others. And that's how the numbers got decided. The reality of the numbers is you also want this experience to be meaningful for the participants. And if you get much beyond 18 or so, in a 2-hour interview, everyone's not going to be able to ask a question. And if you're coming to a meeting and you're not asking a question, you somehow feel a little bit demeaned unless you just don't want to. So to say half of the committee can ask questions and the other half is just going to listen and not participate. So the idea of 18 was a practical kind of number of what works for a group this size, and how do we identify the broadest representation and let those groups pick their representatives, not that the board is deciding that. The board's criteria was, and I think if you look at that letter when we talked to the PTAs, or the PTA leadership, it was across level, region, race, programmatic kinds of issues, and they did a really good job. The group that functioned last time did a tremendous job of working together, honoring the confidentiality aspect, and really thinking about the needs of all students across the spectrum. So just because you may not have a child in a particular group or you don't represent a particular area of the county didn't mean that those factors weren't included in the discussion that people had. So I think coming back to the idea of what are the groups in the county as much as possible that represent that segment of the community. And the one thing that I have that I'm going off of my recollection, which is always a bad thing, but I think the PTA may have invited PTO parents to apply. I think we had that discussion.
Well, I don't. My recollection is it didn't just go out to PTAs. You know, it was a broader.
We asked them to be the screening mechanism to receive.
They were the ones who got the applications. You didn't have to be a PTA member to apply.
Correct.
I'm pretty sure.
I think that's the case.
And I think going back to a point that was made earlier, once they get their system, we can certainly send it out to every parent and say, here's the application process, and you as a parent are eligible to apply.
And they developed a pretty thoughtful application from what my recollection was. We can go back and I'm sure get it in terms of why did you want to serve on it and what experience do you bring. And so I think having the committee represent the county as much as possible in terms of its diversity is great, and you strive to do that. But I think having the groups identify the participants is equally as important, because I don't think you want people feeling like the board picked the participants. You want the associations to pick their participants to send to represent those particular groups. But we also ask them to think about it from the point of view that you're participating in this to represent the needs of all 186,000 children in the school district, not just a particular perspective.
Okay, so maybe there are a couple of things that kept coming up that maybe we could go ahead and get a sense of the board on, and I think in particular that Chamber of Commerce, EDA Foundation, like what do we want to do about that? One proposal is that we replace the Chamber of Commerce with the foundation or the Economic Development Authority, or we take out the Chamber of Commerce and do the foundation and the Economic Development Authority. Or so, does somebody want to make a proposal, and we can just go ahead and get a show of hands? Janie, tell me again.
It was not just the Northern Virginia. There's other regional Fairfax chambers and have representatives.
Okay, if I could ask you that, we have probably a dozen.
Okay.
Are you talking about a dozen?
I have four in my area alone.
Yeah, so I'm trying to pull out sort of things that would, because listening to what Hank just said, we want to keep the numbers reasonable. So keeping the numbers at around, I'll be with you in a minute, keeping the numbers at around what we have now, 18. What could we do about the Chamber of Commerce, EDA Foundation question?
I would propose that we do the Northern Virginia Chamber, because they are an umbrella group, and add the foundation, and that's it for the business community.
Okay, so there's something on the table, Northern Virginia Chamber and the foundation. If people can do a show of hands, if we feel like we need more conversation, we can do that, but let's try a show of hands that we have, instead of what we have now, which is the Fairfax County Chamber, we do the foundation and the NOVA Chamber both. Who's okay with that?
Sorry, that's to support this entire thing with that one addition.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. All right. I think that works then. Okay, so we've added a group, so we have 19 now, but it may be more representative. I'm trying to think of the NAACP is another group that came up a lot in our conversation. So maybe a sense of the board of whether or not we feel like we should add the NAACP, a seat at the table for the NAACP. Yes, raise your hand if you think we should. Okay, and raise your hand if you think that we don't need to do that. Okay, all right. That's the sense that I got from the conversation, is that with MSAOC, we have hopefully represented the community. Is there anything that came up a lot that I'm not bringing up, keeping in mind that, we want to be able to move forward? And before I take that, Hank, how much, are you hoping that we can really put this to bed tonight?
The reality of this is, for the organizations that have to reach out to their members, they're going to need a couple of weeks to do that. Like the application process to the parents is probably a 2-week process to get the letters out, the notification out, the applications in, people picked. So that will take us into early March. They're picking dates, the end of, the dates are defined that they have to participate on the 29th, 30th, and 31st. So I don't know that you can wait much longer to get information out to all of those participants to say, can you serve on these dates? It's not, do you want to serve on this and we're going to figure out a time you can participate. It's, can you find us a representative who can be here on these 4 days that we have defined and commit basically that period of time? So you can't put this off for 2 weeks and then ask people to have another 2 weeks to apply and pick the committee a day or two beforehand. Because the other piece of this is I need to work with them a week or two in advance of the committee meeting to gather their information. They all submit questions to help develop the script. And so today's kind of a drop dead.
All right, Elizabeth and then Sandy.
I did not hear a resolution on how to include a teacher or employee who is not a member of an organization. That's one. And I'm not necessarily advocating growing it. And I did not hear, and I know that there's not going to be agreement, but I would like there to be consideration of the comment about the Fairfax County Federation of Civic Associations not necessarily being representative of all. And just because they are a group doesn't mean they're representative.
Okay, so your advocacy, the first one is that we add to the 3 representatives we have from FEA, FCFT, and AFPE, another teacher, and I don't...
Or employee.
Employee, okay. Do you have an advocacy about how that person would be selected?
I do. I think that whatever application is used by those organizations, there is no reason why, if it goes out via communication, if we're already advocating that all the PTAs, PTSOs, basically there's a blast, that same blast can include the recommendation of a teacher, and if FCCPTA is going to pick that they can't use that slot to then, if they're already vetting, why can't they vet a teacher to go along with?
So you're talking about adding that to the FCCPTA's
because we're all going to be utilizing a communication tool to broadly broadcast, and we can say in there that the 3 organizations are going to be represented and that those organizations will be outreaching to their employee base whom they represent, and that in addition, we're going to pick one non-organization employee.
And the FCCPTA is going to pick that. So the FCCPTA, under your method, would pick the parent members and add a teacher who they pick. Okay.
Or one employee, I think she said.
One employee, I'm sorry, one employee. Okay. So can I get a show of hands of who thinks that sounds like a good way to go? Raise your hand if you like it. Okay. Those who are not sold? All right, well, thank you for the idea. And the other one was the Fairfax Federation of Civic Citizens Associations. I think maybe just get a show of hands if you want that to stay on the list. Okay, all right. Who else? Let's see, Miss Evans, did you also? Okay, Ms. Evans?
Yeah, I wanted to address, so one other thing we had discussed was the student representatives, and while, I initially was going with the idea of one per region, I think I've been persuaded that having the 2 who are 18 years old, have Ms. Chu on there who has been selected, have the SAC choose another one. I think hopefully they will be wise in their selection. As much as, in a perfect world, I would like to have the diversity of the students. I think when we're talking about trying to get everybody in a room and keeping the numbers small, I've been persuaded that what we had the last time worked.
So your advocacy is to leave it as is?
To leave it as is.
Okay.
You had asked if there were other issues, and
Thank
that was
you.
one.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. If anybody wants to recommend something different for the students, and we can get a sense of the board. Oh, yes, Ms. Dernick. Okay, put your...
I mean, it was having one student representative from each region. I understand if it's growing unwieldy arms. I get that, but I'll just check the pulse of the board to see if anybody agrees.
Okay,
or
so
disagrees.
one student from each of the 5 regions. Raise your hand if you think that's a good change we should make. Okay, well, thank you, Ms. Stepp.
In lieu of that, is there any reason why we couldn't include in the direction to FCC PTA that because there's 5 parents that 1 come from each region? Because that would address, and I think that's a valid concern. And maybe that's like a reasonable set of instructions, is that we ask that they try to solicit and have 1 from each region?
I would be agreeable to that.
Okay.
Well, I would argue we already have geographic diversity. And so I don't know that we necessarily want to tie their hands by saying that it's region by region. You know, they might find geographic diversity in a way that's not region by region. You know, as long as they have geographic diversity, do we really care if it's region by region as opposed to just they know that they have to have it from all over the county?
Well, let's put it out there, the idea that we want to direct the FCC PTA to find their 5 parents, 1 from each region, you know, and also produce all that other diversity that we're asking for. Who thinks that we should direct them to find 1 parent for each region? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so that passes. All right, anything else? All right, thank you, Hank. So do we want to do a quick?
We fulfilled 3 of our goals. We were a little late on the 4th, but that's okay. Just a quick overview of next steps. So I will get information on the characteristics back out to you. We'll start getting that disseminated to candidates as well once you have a chance to review it. Sometime around February 23rd, 24th, I'm going to send you an email and give you access to the applications, which will be posted on the portal. Megan raised a question earlier as to whether you want paper copies of those or whether you want access electronically in terms of information. So if somebody really does want paper copies as opposed to electronic copies, could you let me know that and just send me an email and we'll take care of getting that done. On March 2nd, we're going to meet at 6 o'clock till whenever. That's an open-ended meeting. We're going to review those applications, and you're going to determine who the board wishes to interview on March 14th, 15th, and 16th. I think we've set the calendar up for 7 slots of time, but we'll work through that on the 2nd in terms of the number of people that you choose to see. At the end of those first round of interviews, we're going to debrief all the candidates, and you're going to decide who are the candidates that you'd like to move forward in the process to bring back for a second interview with the board. It's usually a dinner and a conversation afterwards. And prior to that second interview that same day, the committee will have a chance to meet those candidates and give you their input. So we have a busy schedule between the end of February and the end of March in terms of selecting applications or applicants to interview, conducting the first round of interviews and debriefing those candidates, and determining who you want to move forward before you make a selection on your preferred candidate the end of March. And then you still have a couple of weeks of time to do site visits and contract negotiations before anything would be made public.
So for anybody who's would like it, this is all written.
It's all in the planning meeting minutes that you've received a couple times. They're on the portal as well, but I'll get them out to you again so you have that.
Questions? Ms. McLaughlin?
I remember last time we talked about being able to see all of the resumes, even beyond the ones you recommended. So we'll have access to see all of those. That's correct.
Correct.
And in terms of this new environmentally friendly paperless approach, so for the resumes, same thing. Ideally, we're going to just look at those electronically, and then if we come out at that first meeting wanting then to have some paper copies, because I tend to like to be able to make notes if we were going to the next round, then we would need to make that request through you or just print them out ourselves, right?
You can print them out yourself, or
Okay.
if people want copies for the interviews, we can certainly get those to you. So I think last time you did have a paper copy for the interview
For
that you
the
could
actual
write.
interview part, so
That
you
you
can
could
make
write
notes.
notes on. But,
Okay.
if there's 30 applicants that you're reviewing and
Yeah.
10 of them are people you're going to look at and say, I don't think this person is qualified. Do you want to? An application is about 8 to 10 to 12 pages, along with 3 or 4 letters of recommendation. So, it's a chunk of paper if we print everybody's application.
Right. And then the other question is, in terms of the process with us benefiting from the community panel, so have you ever done it this way with the other school divisions where the board actually gets to come and meet with that panel to talk to them, hear their input, and or ask questions?
I have. And so it's a matter of scheduling the time. We might have to readjust the time between the first interview and the second interview because, if you remember last time, it was about a half an hour of time we had between the completion of the community process and when the board started dinner. So I had about a half an hour to share that information. If you're going to do that and invite the panel to come talk to you about that and share their thoughts and ask them questions, I think you're going to need longer than a half an hour. But it would be a matter of adjusting that schedule.
The reason I only bring this up, everybody, and if we don't want to have to decide it exactly right now, but I do think here we spend all of this time trying to ask them to, participate in this process. And I just don't want to shortchange, their investment in there. And so if it, logistically, again, this is something that maybe Ms. Evans, if you and Ms. Strauss want to talk with Hank and you guys figure out logistically if this is even reasonable to try and do this where the board actually has the opportunity to sit with the community panel before we go into the dinner with the finalists or whatever. I haven't made my mind up one way or the other, but it is something that it crossed my mind, and I wondered if anybody else has thought about it.
That's not an issue that we have to decide today. We can plan the schedule that there could be sufficient time between the committee ending and the board starting to allow that to happen if you choose to do that in the future. All I need to do is to be able to tell the committee what their commitment is going to be in terms of time. And if it turns out to be less, I'm sure they'll be delighted. So I'll plan on a more extended period of time and it end up ending earlier. That won't be a problem at all. So that could be decided later because I know we are behind schedule. So that's not a discussion we have to have today.
Mrs. Schultz? I just want to throw this out there that for those of us who were on this last time, I don't need to laud any more praises on you. You know how we feel about you, Hank. From my recollection, you gave a phenomenal synthesis, and we are so squeezed at that point that the notion of bringing 18 people to we 12 in the midst of all of this, to me right now, like just hearing that is overwhelming. I think that we hired you for a reason, and one of the reasons was to do exactly this, was to synthesize. We set forth the process, we get the people in. This is already a layer beyond what many school divisions do. They just make the decision themselves. And I think we have to lovingly let go and give you the ability to synthesize what happens at that meeting for us. So even if we're not deciding tonight, I want to lay the kernel that I remember that worked extremely well. And if it worked well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Okay, so Hank, you've done a great job of bringing us much closer to on target. We've gone from 3 hours over to 1 hour over, so I am going to let you go. Thank you very much, unless there's anything else you need to say. We have another work session starting in 3 minutes, so quick break.
Thank you all for your time.